The hardest part of this video is the fact that, well, nobody wants to see how sausages are made. Nobody wants to accept their role or their responsibility in things. When there's something ugly and there's something terrible and there's something downright evil, we want to turn a blind eye to it. We don't want to admit any culpability. We don't want to admit that we made a mistake. And not just a minor mistake, but the sort of mistake that wound up causing a train to crash and killing 20,000 people. That's the last thing that we want to admit that we did. And I'm not trying to shame or shock or emotionally manipulate anybody out there. I want to present a philosophical case to make you revisit the abortion debate if you are pro-choice. Now, I'm going to assume that you already believe in the dignity of the human being. If you don't believe in the dignity of the human being, if you don't think that, like, even as an atheist, that even if it's completely arbitrary, you know, if we just made up the whole concept of individual human dignity, that we should still fight for it. If you don't believe in that, then there's no reason to be opposed to the Holocaust. There's no reason that whenever there's an inconvenient people, you know, we exterminate them, we starve them to death. They're inconvenient. They're getting in the way of the Soviet state. So Holodomor, you know, whatever. Let those people starve. They're inconvenient. If you don't believe in human dignity, then I can't convince you of anything. You know, if you're willing to kill somebody just because they are preventing you from being a little bit happy. If that isn't one of your terminal values, I can't speak to you, so don't even bother with the video. But I'm going to assume that most of you out there believe in the value of human life. That you would be disgusted by any doctor that would say that, you know, post-birth abortions are acceptable. That a 2-year-old baby, because it's not a fully functional, fully formed adult yet, well, we can still put it to death. That's just okay. I assume that you're against that. You're against killing babies. Well, we need to draw a line somewhere, don't we? About when a fetus becomes a human life. It's obviously before birth happens, because it is viable outside of the womb for weeks before the birth occurs. But from a purely atheist perspective, it's not a human life 5 minutes after the sperm fertilizes the egg. Well, let's talk about some of the facts about fetal development in the womb. So, the brain starts forming in 3 to 4 weeks. The hemispheres separate at 8 weeks. There are rudimentary connections forming by 12 weeks. By the 16th week, the baby will start responding to sounds. By the 19th week, it'll respond to pain. And by the 24th week, it'll survive outside of the womb. Those are the official scientific facts on the whole matter. If you actually listen to anybody that's worked for Planned Parenthood, they will report to you that babies will fight back and will respond to pain as early as the 12th week. Regardless, this is a scientific question. By the time a brain has formed, there's a nascent personality there. There's a human beginning to form. And if you're going to say that a 1-year-old baby that doesn't yet have the cognition, the capacity of cognition that the family dog has, if you'll agree that right there, that 1-year-old baby is a person, then the baby in the womb that has the brain developed, has the nascent personality beginning, that is having experiences, that is also a person. And you absolutely need to draw a line there. At some point during the second trimester, you need to draw a line where abortion is no longer legal. It's not abortion, it's murder. And I think that's a fairly simple stance that anybody, if agnostic, atheist, we can all agree that when there is a brain present, when there is neurological activity, that's a human being. And they deserve all the protections that a human being deserves. So that's about half the abortion debate right there. Now for the second half. Abortion is marketed as a quick outpatient procedure, just popping a zit, removing a tumor. That's not the practical function of it, though. That's not what it actually is. Abortion might be an outpatient procedure. It only takes about 20 minutes to perform. But counseling is a major function of most of these abortion clinics. Most women, when you get down into the birthing straddles, and her womb is opened up and it's suctioned out. And again, I'm not trying to be too graphic here, but it is an extremely traumatic experience. And not just for that day. It's not just a brief traumatic experience, the way that surgery for a car accident is going to be traumatic, like it or not. It's something that she's going to keep with her for the rest of her life. Most women do want to have children eventually. You know, we have these funny instincts that, you know, actually drive us to want to be parents, believe it or not. Might not believe it when you're 17, but by the time you're 30, it starts becoming pretty evident that, yeah, we have instincts to raise children. Most people do. So these girls that went and got abortions, they are going to be thinking about that. That is going to be carrying with them the rest of their life, that they killed their baby. You know, we're not talking about the morning after pill. You know, we're not talking about a simple abortifacient that gives them cramps for a couple of days. We're talking about a violent and invasive procedure that is going to stay with them the rest of their life and that they're going to be questioning for the rest of their life. All because they felt a baby was a little bit inconvenient. And the third point I think that you should consider, even if you're pro-choice, you need to seriously consider this, is that those are two very compelling arguments that I just brought up. If you believe in the dignity of human life, and if you care about somebody's psychological well-being moving forward into the future, these are things that you should be concerned about. And yet the pro-choice movement will not discuss these things at all. If you bring this up, you are now persona non grata to the pro-choice movement. Even if you are still pro-choice, you are persona non grata. You know, if you're a prominent member and you say this sort of thing, expect a lynch mob sent after you. Expect them to, you know, go after your job. Expect them to publish your address and dox you. Expect all of that. What is going on with the pro-choice movement exactly? Very few people, very few, will defend third trimester abortions. At least not in public. And yet, Planned Parenthood and the other abortion mills, it's estimated that every year in America, 20,000 third-term abortions are performed. Now, if you agree with the first point, if you agree that human life has an innate value to it, if you believe in the dignity of human existence, well, that's 20,000 babies that were murdered. We're not talking about second term, we're not talking about morning after pill, we are talking about children that could have survived out of the womb, that were murdered, that were kicking and screaming and trying to escape the vacuum hose, that were being chopped up inside the womb. Think about that for a moment. The womb, the giver of life, and to have invasive knives and scissors shoved into there. 20,000. Let's talk about Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. She's one of these eugenicists that were very popular during the last century, and actually they're still pretty bloody popular. They're currently sterilizing Indian women and performing circumcision on African men, which is resulting in a lot of African men dying from sepsis, from infection, all because it supposedly prevents AIDS. Very little evidence it does that. And quite frankly, there's some evidence suggesting that African men are getting circumcision so they can stop using condoms. So they're playing all of these grand social experiments on powerless people, whether it's impoverished people or whether it's Jews you lock up in the internment camp. These eugenicists, they're powerful people that like to play social experiments with people's lives. In Alberta, they were sterilizing people that they said were retarded. A lot of them weren't. Margaret Sanger was one of these eugenicists, the founder of Planned Parenthood, and allegedly an extreme racist that wanted to use Planned Parenthood to limit the number of black births. And yeah, the great irony, and yes, it's actually primarily black babies being killed by Planned Parenthood, but the great irony to all of this is that when you have this get out of jail free card, like abortion, you tend to have more sex, more casual sex, and more irresponsible sex. So, good work, Margaret Sanger. You guaranteed that the most irresponsible and criminal of the American blacks are going to have the most children, whereas the responsible, civilized, and forward-moving blacks are having the least. Well done. Kermit Gosnell. I'm sure you know about him. You know, that sadistic monster. If you don't, just look it up. You know, and tell me those weren't babies that he was murdering. And the Center for Medical Progress. I'm sure you've heard about this. How the Center for Medical Progress is exposing all of these Planned Parenthood people that are selling baby parts. They are selling baby parts on the open market, and they don't care about it. You know, there's all this videotape. It's been this investigative journalist endeavor where there's this videotape of these just evil women laughing about it while they're drinking wine and eating their salads at fancy restaurants and saying how they want to sell more baby parts so that they can afford a Lamborghini. And you know, and they tout this stuff. They tout abortion as a quick outpatient procedure. They completely ignore all of the devastation it causes. And see, there's a side effect of this. You know, they tell you birth control works 99% of the time when it's used properly. Well, it's very seldom used properly. But when you have that in the back of your mind, when you take a 16-year-old kid with very little life experience, and at the back of their mind, even if the birth control fails, well, there's abortion and it's a quick outpatient procedure. So you have more people having more casual sex, thinking about the emotional fallout less, thinking about the consequences of having children from it less, ultimately profiting these people who, you know, prominent members are eugenicists, prominent members are criminals. They really seem to have an absolute hatred of life. The pro-choice stance does not have a reasonable position. I personally am very dubious about the morning after pill, about abortificants. I'm very dubious about them. But I don't expect, that's really a matter of my own personal morality. I don't expect to convince anybody factually or logically about that. But late-term abortions, third trimester abortions, you know, that I do expect anyone that believes in human dignity to be opposed to. And pro-choice people, you won't hear this from them. You know, you won't hear any denunciation of Kermit Gosnell, You won't hear, they're going out of their way to cover up what's happening with Planned Parenthood. You won't hear any of this from them. So in light of that, if you are pro-choice and you're an atheist, you need to revisit your stance. I'm not saying you need to start protesting out front of every Planned Parenthood and saying that life starts at conception. That is a very strong, that's a very extreme position. But I do expect you to be logical and rational about it. And if you believe in human dignity, then you need to be opposed to the current leaders of the pro-choice movement. Aurini out, folks.